Yeah, I'm just framing up here. You want to look at the seat?
You don't look the same.
Can't tell the way we met with Kevin.
Now arguing it.
He's paid for the child in school here.
Exactly. All right.
Okay, we all ready?
Here, let me give you. Go ahead.
I need to do. I need the key. All right. Today is October 3rd, 2002. This is the interview of Morris Reaboy. Got it right? Who is 80 years of age, and he's from New Milford, New Jersey. I will be conducting the interview. My name is Bonnie Ziff. I am from the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and we are at the YGCC in Washington Township. Morris, can you tell us your story?
Well, back in the 1940s, I was going to school, and unfortunately, in 1941, Pearl Harbor, we young people were very much nationalistic and patriotic, and so many of us wanted to go into the armed services, but at that particular time, they were extremely careful as to who they wanted to take. And of course, we had a battle with our parents as to whether we wanted to go into the services, and like any parent, they don't want their children to go into the armed services. However, in 1942, October, I enlisted in the Army to go to the Signal Corps schools that they had offered. I did go to various schools in 1942 and early 43 for the benefit of the Signal Corps. In May of 43, I was called to active duty and had to report to Camp Crowder in Missouri. I had taken basic training for 4 weeks at Camp Crowder, but because of having an IQ of 120 or better, they offered me something called Army Specialist Training Program, which is ASTP. Because of this, and after finishing basic, I went to what they call a STAR unit, which was Grinnell College in Iowa. There, I took a series of tests as to what I would be best suited for, and subsequently, they sent me to the University of Kentucky in Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. There I studied engineering under the AST program. Every 4 weeks was another cycle, and the program was extremely accelerated. We spent, I would say, approximately 8 to 10 hours schooling and taking, as I said before, not to sound redundant, engineering. This program started in October and was subsequently stopped in May of 1944 with the anticipation that they needed all the troops they possibly could get because of the potential or subsequent landing of D-Day in Normandy. My education was in engineering. Although I enlisted for the Signal Corps, they sent me to an engineering camp which was at that time called Fort Leonard Wood. Fort Leonard Wood is where we learned Army techniques and in engineering. We learned how to build Bailey bridges. We learned how to make various corduroy roads, which is a road leading to a Bailey bridge. And they made us Bailey Bridge specialist. In May of 44, I went overseas and landed in Liverpool, England. And they moved us so quickly. But prior to that, when we finished the basic training of engineering, which is normally about a 19-week course. We took it in approximately 3 weeks. From there, I went to a camp called Camp Reynolds in northern part of northern Pennsylvania. From there, they moved us down to Camp Shanks, which is a debarkation point, and got on a ship, which at that time was about 3 blocks away from my dad's store in downtown New York. And I had begged the MP to let me go to see my father before I went overseas. But unfortunately, they wouldn't do it, and everything was in strict secrecy, and everything was done on the cover of complete protection for all the troops that were on board ship. When we left the port of New York, which was in the evening, when we woke up the following day, they wouldn't let us on deck during the night at that time, but the following day, when we did finally see daylight, as far as the eye could see, there were ships. And this was part of a convoy. And going overseas, we had, I think, 2 instances where submarines were spotted, enemy submarines, and we were able to hear the anti-submarine explosions. I'm trying to remember the terminology, but so be it. Finally landed in Liverpool and moved us out of Liverpool by the funniest looking trains I ever saw in my life. They were the English trains, and we went to a place called Chester. In Chester, in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, couldn't see a thing, trying to find our duffel bag, and also the hut that we were assigned to. I finally got into the hut, which was at daybreak, because couldn't see anything, and it was really a very pathetic sight. Here they take you, and they drop you off and say, okay, get your duffel bag and go into hut XYZ. As I said before, you couldn't see, so we couldn't know where we were or what we were doing. But at daybreak, we were able to acclimate ourselves and find our hut. From that period of time to the time I went to Southampton, we were constantly training where Montgomery trained his troops with the 8th Army. And it was the most severe type of training that one would ever encounter. It was the closest thing to combat that you can possibly find. However, after that period of time, we went to Southampton, and typical Army style, we were getting in onto a ship, and this is D-Day plus 10 days. And they sent us to a port where, to a pier where troops were coming back that were injured in Normandy. They kept on saying, don't go, shoot yourself, shoot your fingers off, shoot your leg or whatever, but don't go. Of course, the typical situation was a snafu situation. And we weren't supposed to be where the troops were coming back from the D-Day plus.
How did you feel about it when you saw? I mean,
very depressing, and to the point where you said, "What am I doing here? What's this all about?" And subsequently, I landed on Omaha Beach, as I said before, on D+10. And one of the first things I saw was a cemetery on the left-hand side going up the hill. And that cemetery subsequently became the most famous cemetery, which is to this day a very stirring and moving place. I'm going to jump ahead. I visited the cemetery, at least 8 or 9 times since that time, because I knew some of the people that were buried in that cemetery. And it was a very trying time, but being young and somewhat, I'll use a term, stupid and fearless, however, it didn't have the significance that it would have today, because again, being young, you let a lot of things roll off your back. I was fortunate enough to get attached to SHEAF, which is Supreme Headquarters Army Expeditionary Forces, part of Eisenhower's base section and headquarters company. We were the first, after the Battle of St. Lo, we went to a town where we passed through many towns and liberated a town called Granville. In Granville, which is in Normandy, I was taken off the line and was able to find a place, part of Eisenhower's headquarters, and was able to become, well, what's the word I'm really looking for? I guess you would call it part of a team and an outfit. When I first started to work under Colonel Baker, who was part of Eisenhower's team, we requisitioned all the hotels in that town, set up Normandy base section, and became part of headquarters company. Because of some of my accounting background, they let me take inventories of various hotels, and subsequently put me into the post exchange, which is the PX, and became a manager of a post exchange. I was very fortunate in this way because to this day I still think when we were in the field on Friday night, being Jewish, they asked if anyone would like to go to services. And at that particular time, anything to get away from what the, I wouldn't call it the front line, but very close to the front line, so that you didn't have to hear what was going on or see what was going on. I met a lieutenant there, and I said to him, quote, "I'm limited service because of my eyes. I've been going to school throughout my Army career as opposed to some of the other individuals. And what's a good Jewish little boy doing here at this particular time?" And he asked me for my name and my serial number. I think he may have gone back to wherever he did go, headquarters or whatever, and probably looked up my records and sure enough found out I was on limited service, and therefore I shouldn't be where I am.
What did limited service mean?
Pardon?
What did you mean by limited service?
Limited service is that you cannot go into combat because of a physical impairment, whether it may be eyes or ears or whatever. And this is what limited service. It doesn't mean that you're not ready for to be a part of the service, but they limited your as far as combat was concerned. It's funny, we talk about combat. I had lived in a foxhole. I lived in mud up to my eyeballs, and the famous expression was, "Change your socks." Everything that I owned was wet, so you change your socks from one wet pair to another wet pair. But they kept on telling you, change your socks, and of course, being a soldier, you listened to what they told you. I was in mud, as I said before, up to my eyeballs, and we were walking down a road, and I noticed a brook, and it had like little falls, and they allowed us to take a 10-minute break in our march. And being so dirty, I said, what the hell, I have nothing to lose. I jumped into the brook and tried to clean off my uniform and everything else. And before I know it, there must have been about 8 or 10 of us doing the very same thing. We stopped in a town called, outside of a town called Croutons. And there, for the first time, I experienced something that I thought I would never see. Children begging for food. We were on the chow line and having food given to us, but we couldn't give the food directly to, after we finished, and whatever we had left, we couldn't give it to them. We had to put it into a container, and then the kids were able to take food out of a container, or as we would call it, a garbage can, so that they had something to eat. It was very depressing to see young kids begging for food.
Why didn't they allow you to give it directly?
We couldn't feed the civilian population. And which reminds me of the story. Coming up from the beach on Omaha, the first thing I saw was an old woman with a young child, of maybe 3, 4 years old, and the house that was shot half away. And the little child kept on saying, merci. Not knowing French at the particular time, I thought she was saying, have mercy, or pity.
Lori Pelson, please go to babysitting. Lori Pelson to babysitting.
I stopped and took out of my backpack chocolate and gave it to the young child. And she kept on saying merci, and the more she was saying merci, the more food I was giving her. And that too was an incident which I will never forget, because that was the first time I encountered a house that was bombed away. And the interesting part of this whole thing is that was the first French word I learned, to say thank you, or merci. I know I digressed a little bit.
No, absolutely.
Then, as I told you, we traveled south, and we were spearheading General Patton at that time, which was his 3rd Army, and he came in, and I watched some of his tanks coming through, and et cetera, and et cetera. He came through from St. Lo, where the breakout, down to Argentan, Felice, and at the Felice Gap is where Patton almost lost his army, because he was far ahead of where he should have been, without supplies, without gasoline, without all the needs, and waiting for the service of supply to subsequently meet up with him. But I was, at that time, I was already off the line, and I was working, as I said before, part of Normandy Base Section, and had a pretty good job. In fact, I would say it was a very good job working in Army Exchange Service.
Can I ask you, how big was your unit that you were working with?
The unit, headquarters company, I would say there must have been approximately, about 200 of us taking over an area. And it is through this area that the line of communications, line of transportation, all the things that were needed to supply the moving army, we had been responsible for.
When was your unit formed? Was that formed in England before you came over?
I'm not sure. Well, I would say this had to be formed in England, but since I was not part of the original unit, I really don't know. but I can safely say this, that there were a lot of us that were taken off the line and put into this headquarters company. And there were a lot of us who had MOs, which an MO was the military occupation. And they formed a cadre, and this cadre made up the entire base section. There were people, for example, in food distribution, food depot. There were people in transportation. There were people in communication. So that all aspects of the service was taken care of. We opened up a recreation center, which was subsequently used for R&R, recreation, and here troops were able to spend a couple of days and enjoy themselves. Granville was a town that was on the coast of the English Channel. It was used by the Germans as a coal depot. They would bring in coal and move it through the trains that were in Granville. It was a port area with many cranes and utilized by the Germans at that time. It was a port area jetting out into the English Channel. Off the coast of Granville were the Channel Islands. Those were the islands of Guernsey, Hofsey, and etc. These islands were bypassed by the American forces during the D-Day invasion. And the reason for it, they thought it wasn't necessary to take the islands, but meanwhile the Germans were still on these islands. In fact, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. The Germans would come off these islands onto the coast of Normandy, and the reason they would come off the islands with their boats is they needed food, they needed all the things that they possibly couldn't have on the islands. And they would have what these called these minor commando raids of theirs. But since the American forces and the British forces felt it wasn't necessary to go after them, the best thing was to just leave them there, and whatever they did, they did. In fact, one night around 11 o'clock, we saw some strange lights, and radar picked up 3 ships coming in from the islands. And the officers at the time were having a party, and the officer on duty didn't make, he made very light of the thing that was happening, thinking, unfortunately, that, well, let me qualify that, thinking that it was another nuisance raid and nothing of any significance. Around 12:30 that night, the whole town lit up. They were coming in on 3 parts of the town because Granville jet out into the English Channel, and they came in on 3 parts and came into the port areas. They landed their troops. They were fully in combat gear with shooting up the area. Since we were so far behind the lines, we had no guns, nothing to stop the invasion of these Germans. They killed several Americans, took a lot of American prisoners, took a lot of UNRWA personnel, UNRWA, United Nations Rehabilitation Relief Agency, and they were taken prisoner and taken back to the islands. We didn't see these people until after the war's end, and that was in May of 1955. That's when the war was over in the European theater. But when they did come back, I was still in Granville, and I did see some of my friends, they were as thin as skeletons because of the lack of food, and some of them were so thin that they had to be taken to hospitals to be built up again, have their bodies built up again. I'm jumping ahead of myself, but again, my experience in the Army Exchange Service was great. We hired civilian personnel. In fact, one of the civilian girls, the minute I saw her, I said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And I was engaged to a girl back home. This particular female, her name being Suzanne, went home that day and said that she met a funny-looking GI, but there was something about him. My captain, who was in charge of the PX, saw her as well too, and he tried to date her, and she would have nothing to do with him. And in fact, she would say to me, he would want to take her home after working hours, and she would say to me, she did speak a little English, come with me, because I fear this man. And I didn't want to get in the middle of a situation, and I said, no, it's okay, he's a nice guy, everything's okay, don't worry. And she said no. And then she would, every night she would make sure that I was there with her, with my captain. And I told Captain Coppage at that time, I don't want to get in the middle of this, and I'm going to tell you very frankly, she's afraid of you. So if I were you, I would just, beg her off. So he says, okay, and this is exactly what happened. Various times during the day while in the PX, she would teach me French and I would teach her English. And we got to know each other very well. The funny part of it is I kept on writing home saying everything is great. I was lonely and et cetera, but meanwhile I was seeing this girl and I had a tremendous fondness for her, and all I can say is that it was meant to be. Anyway, after the war, they closed up the PX in Granville. When I say after the war, after the combat and the war ended in Europe, they were moving us to the various camps that they built up in the Le Havre area, which was again a port of debarkation. And that port of debarkation was for the movement of troops from the European theater back to the States, and then subsequently to the Pacific theater.
Lori Pelson, please go to babysitting. Lori Pelson to babysitting.
We opened up warehouses, and as the troops were coming back to the port areas, Le Havre, Cherbourg, etc., we would outfit them with complete PX rations. I was in charge of the warehouses with a staff of people under me. Some of the people outranked me, but I never wanted to get involved with the politics of rank. And my captain friend, Captain Coppage, became a major, and he was the one who made sure, and since he was a PX officer, made sure that he got me at that time. Normandy base section moved up to Brussels and became part of Channel or Channel base section, and they had handled all of the political and the military things out of Brussels. I was put on temporary duty to run these PX warehouses in the Le Havre area. I finally ended up at a place called Camp Home Run and had enough points to go home at that time. And my captain, Captain Coppage, now Major Coppage, went home, and he made sure that I got a rank. And as I told him so many times, I wasn't interested in the rank. I was interested in going home because I just wanted to go home. Anyway, I had the opportunity to work for the Army Exchange Service, but it meant moving to Germany, and I've been gone from the States approximately 2 years, and I didn't want to stay in Europe, even though I knew that eventually I would come back to Europe and meet Suzanne, and all the time, wherever I went, I was able to get my wife to be a job with Army Exchange Service. In fact, she saw me go down to the port in Le Havre and watch me get on a ship. She was there with a lieutenant friend of mine, and we came home in February of 1946. On the ship, I don't know how many thousand of troops were on the ship, but from the day that we left Le Havre to the day that we got into New York Harbor, it was one storm after another after another. And wherever you went, there were soldiers that were regurgitating all over the place. And wherever you went, there was vomit. And whether you went to the latrine or no matter where you went, and some of the soldiers were saying, throw me overboard. That's how sick they were. For whatever the reason may be, I got sick the first day, and then from that time on, I lived up on the top deck and made it my business to go down and get food and then go back on top deck. I was the KP pusher on board ship. I would have to wake some of the troops up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning so that they could go on KP on the ship. Finally, we landed in New York in February '46, and I went from the ship to Camp Dix, or Fort Dix, and Fort Dix was the place where I subsequently was mustered out of the Army and went home and called my girlfriend, the girl I was engaged to, and she met me, and when I saw her, I was glad to see her, but somehow or other the spark wasn't there. I stayed home for approximately, I would say maybe a couple of months, and this is 1946, and I was meeting with my fiancée, and I made life unbearable because she had my ring and monies of mine, and I would make dates with her and never keep them. And I guess she got a little disgusted and gave me back the ring and the bank book. In September of 1947, I was going to school and working at the same time, and I decided I'm going back to Europe because I was in constant contact with my wife-to-be. Over the period of time, we wrote letters to each other, and I did tell her that one day I will come back. She did wait for me, and in October of '47, or pardon me, in September of '47, I went back to Europe and stayed in Europe from September of '47 to December of '47. I married my wife in Europe, and it was a civil ceremony, but being, as I said before, and I don't want to get into the religious aspect of it, a little Jewish boy marrying a Catholic girl, it was a no-no with my parents. And my parents said they would disown me and all the things that went with it. And knowing my parents, they would never do that to me. So I gambled and I won and went back to Europe. And as I said before, married the girl that I met in Europe. We left. I lived in Europe for the 3 months, and coming back to the States in December of '47 was one of the last ships to come in under the GI Bry laws. She was able to come into the United States without any fanfare or papers or other than the fact that she had to have a French passport and have clearance from the French local government. While in Europe, living with her, we went to Paris many times, and actually it was a great time for the 3 or 4 months that I had with her in Europe. I got to know her much better, and it was, in fact, even to this day, which is 55 years later, we're still in love and the whole 9 yards that goes with it. When we came home, there was no place to live. I lived with my folks for a while, and finally going to school in the evening and working during the day, I got into accounting, but didn't like accounting, and because of a opening in the company that I was working for in the credit department, they said with my background in education, I would be perfect for the position as credit manager in the company that I was working for. Not knowing too much about credit, but having an accounting background, I said to the treasurer of the company, I will go to school under the GI Bill and learn everything about credit and collections. I went to school, took many courses at the New York Institute for Credit, which was one of the highly recognized schools for credit, and took every course that they had pertaining to all aspects of credit and the commercial aspect, the law aspect of it, and all aspects of it. I became somewhat of a financial statement analysis expert, if you can call it that, and I did extremely well. From there, I can only say life has been good to me. I had 2 beautiful girls with my wife, and 3 grandchildren, one of which was killed by a drunk driver. He was going to graduate from college and came home from Thanksgiving and was crossing the street and got killed. And it's been hard on me, on my daughter, my wife, but we're managing. But there's every day of my life, there's something that always reminds me of my Adam. He was a great, great grandson. Not once in my relationship with him did he ever raise his voice to me. Not once. And the reason for it is he respected me, and he respected my wife. He adored my wife. And the only thing I could say, he's in God's hands. And he was just a beautiful person. My other grandchildren, one of which is my granddaughter is going to graduate college this coming May. My other grandson is a junior in high school. I've been retired for the last 15 years, and all I can say is that life has been beautiful, and I couldn't ask for anything better.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to take you back, because I have all sorts of questions you were doing. I didn't want to interrupt you. So why did you want to join the Signal Corps?
The only way I wanted to join the Signal Corps was to enlist in the Army, to stay out of the Army, because knowing for the next 11 weeks or 19 weeks I would be going to school for the Signal Corps and learning all aspects of Signal Corps. In fact, I went as far as what they called pre-radar, taking courses in math and physics, And in fact, I built a radio while going to school, and got what they call oscillation, which is where you hear sound, and that's and you're picking up sound waves through the receiver that you built, and it was good.
Do you do anything with radio since?
No, no, unfortunately, no. To be totally candid with you, I was going for business administration, and I'd rather go that route as opposed to engineering.
And did you ever have a chance to build, I forgot the type of bridge, Bailey Bridge?
Oh yes, that was outside of St. Lo. We built a bridge where Patton came across with his tanks. In fact, I often said when we went back to Europe, that bridge is the bridge that I helped build many, many years ago. And in fact, that bridge was still up when we did visit Europe. I used to go back to Europe every second or third year with my wife.
Her family, of course, is still there.
Yes, she had family, her mother and her father, and a sister and a brother. And all I can say is that they were beautiful people and wonderful people, and I enjoyed them. When I come out of the Army, you know, trying to find a place to live was almost an impossibility, but I signed up for the New York City housing project, and they moved me into a middle income project up in the Bronx called the Gun Hill Project. And I tell you, it was a great life there, because we couldn't tell stories about how much money we're making, because you were limited at that time to a certain income. And if you went beyond the income, they would give you surcharges on a monthly basis. And then if you made too much money, they asked you very politely to leave. Unfortunately, this is what happened to me. I began to make some monies over and above what the requirements were for the city housing, and looked for a house in New Jersey, and subsequently did buy a house in New Jersey. And I'm still living in the same house which I purchased in 1954. And
How much did my husband wants to know, how much did you spend at the time? when you
for the
bought
house, I had to put $1,000 down for a down deposit, and the house was $18,500, and today that house is worth close to $400,000, between $350,000 and $400,000, which shows you how the economy has changed and how the lifestyles have changed, and the cost of living going up tremendously.
A couple of questions. Where did your parents live when you first enlisted in the Army? Or where did you live?
We lived in the Bronx on the concourse on 182nd and 183rd Street, 2255 Grand Concourse. And it's a very funny thing. When we moved into that house, there was a doorman there and 3 elevators in the house, but I couldn't see anyone opening up a door for me. So what I used to do is go down through the cellar, go into the cellar and take the elevator up, so that someone didn't pick up or open up a door for me. I couldn't see someone opening a door for me. That to me was, I just didn't like it. But of course, my mother, the way she is, she thought it was great, but as far as I was concerned, was taking advantage of a human being.
As far as you said the Battle of St. Lo, did you actually see combat in that battle?
No, I didn't. But I think I helped load half the ammunition that they were using in the artillery for that battle. No, I did not see combat there. Very interesting story, though, going back to the area outside of St. Lo. I was standing guard duty in a hedgerow. A hedgerow was one of the areas that the American troops had to fight through, and where the Germans would pin a hedgerow. Actually is a square, or could be oval, whatever, where there was vegetation growth, and in the middle is where they did their farming. Most of the hedgerows were either mined or they're booby-trapped, and you had to be extremely careful. One night, it was what we call bed check Annie. At 11 o'clock every night, a German plane would come over and buzz around, and if you ever lit a match in the complete darkness, you could see it for miles. Mm-hmm. And if anyone would light a match, this German plane would come down and drop bombs on it. So this one night, I'm at guard duty outside of a hedgerow, and all I could hear was that plane buzzing above me. And what I did is, there was a foxhole there, but I kept digging further underneath the hedgerow and into the hedgerow, and I kept on saying, go away, you know, to myself I'm saying this. And there were 3 of us that were on guard duty in that particular sector or hedgerow. And after he left, it was a relief for myself, and I knew that every night this guy would come, and I hope to God that he didn't hit above my hedgerow or wherever we were stationed at that particular time.
And that brings me to the question of, where were you at those were the foxholes you were in?
Yes.
Outside of, okay. And where you were very, how did the war affect your wife's family? Did they have to move? Or
it was a terrible, terrible time. In fact, I lived in a house, mm-hmm. and they were bombed out. And then subsequently, they moved to another town called St. Pierre, which was about 5 or 6 kilometers away from Granville. Living under the Germans was the worst thing they possibly encountered in their entire lives. They had to leave their doors open. If you ever locked your door and a German patrol came by and your door was open, they would take you to Gestapo headquarters. My father-in-law was taken to Gestapo headquarters on many occasions because he liked his aperitif from time to time, and would go into a local cafe, and sometimes the German troops would be there, and they would say, "Drink with me," and he did not want to drink with the Germans because he was in World War I and did not like the Germans, and he did not want to have anything to do with them. Because of that, many years of time he was taken to Gestapo headquarters in town at the Hotel Normandy and had to get whipped. And one time they came, that they locked the door and they busted the door down and took him away. And he was gone for several days and again beaten. As far as the young girls were concerned, and my wife and her sister and her brother, they'd scrounge for food. What they would do from time to time, if they needed coal, for example, they would go down near where the trains would come, and they would throw stones at the German soldiers while the trains were going by, and the German soldiers would throw coal at them. But that's how they were able to get coal, believe it or not. I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but that's the way they existed as far as coal was concerned. And food, they would have to travel many kilometers to go to farms to try to get food and whatever, just to stay alive.
After the American occupation or after D-Day, how were they affected?
They enjoyed, in the beginning, the American troops. The reason for it is the Americans were so giving of themselves, and they were able to well, I guess the French were very receptive to the Americans because they were living under a dictatorship and under German rule. And interesting story, my wife told me that just before the coming of the Americans, there were two, one a Canadian pilot or airplane and an American buzzed the town. The Canadian was shot down by the Germans, but they were able to escape from the plane and land safely, injured. And two of them were killed though. Now, what had happened is the Germans buried the two that were killed, and during the night, the French people dug up the grave and buried them someplace else, and with flowers and etc. and etc. When the Germans learned about this, they removed the two Canadians and buried them back in the same place that they originally buried them. Meanwhile, they put a curfew on the people in town because of the things that they did. They were the Marquis in towns. They were the French resistance, and they did a lot of damage to the communications, transportation, and etc. For the against the Germans. Very interesting from the standpoint of living under the German occupation. They, without a doubt, had it hard, but when the Americans came, they found that, as I said before, very generous. We were giving of ourselves. But like everything else, good things come to an end, and the Americans really spoiled it for themselves, because behind the lines at this point in time, there was all kinds of things going on, black market, all the things that I could never see. In fact, when I was running the PXs, if I found out that a GI was selling his rations, we would have the MPs arrest him. I was really gung-ho, and I did not, whether you believe this or not, take one chocolate bar out of that PX unless I paid for it. And the same thing with with the French civilians. We would.
Paulette Spiegel, please call.
We would.
Paulette Spiegel.
We would, from time to time, examine their handbags and etc., because we always had an MP stationed in the PX to make sure that no GI or Frenchmen were out of line. The one time that I did say I had a GI arrested.
Paulette Spiegel, please call the front desk. Paulette Spiegel.
He was selling his rations to a Frenchman, and that to me was a no-no. I would rather give it away than sell anything. I was there for a reason, and I made sure that I did participate 100% under the laws of the occupation, under the American laws.
What was your rank?
At that time, I was a PFC, and my captain would say to me, "Morris, let me get you more rank." I said, "Leave everything alone. I don't want them to know that I'm still here. Don't rock the boat. Leave it alone." And that's the reason why rank didn't mean a thing to me.
What were your quarters?
Pardon?
Your quarters.
Oh, I lived in a hotel that we occupied. And in fact, that was the hotel where the Germans were running and back at the time that they come off the ship. And as I said before, very interesting, I had to go to the bathroom so badly, and I didn't know where to go. So I did it in my helmet and tossed it out the window. But it was a helmet without a helmet liner. It was like the thing going down way over my ears and everything else, but that's the only thing I felt safe with.
Were you particularly when you had some friends taken as prisoner of war?
Yes.
Okay. Do you keep in touch with anyone now?
Unfortunately, I lost touch with everyone.
Everyone but your wife.
Yeah.
Were you particularly, when they were taken, were you assumed killed, or did you expect to see them again?
I never expected to see them again, because I always felt that the Germans would subsequently kill them. Why feed them? Let's kill them instead of feeding them.
And they had been taken back to the islands, right?
Yes.
I understood that.
And then they did come off the islands, and Granville being so close to the islands, they did come back. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times that my brother-in-law sent me about the raid on Granville, and I think they did mention a lot of UNRWA personnel were taken prisoners, as well as American soldiers.
Were you in cooperation with other country troops? That's the UNRWA.
UNRWA, well,
Yeah.
that's United Nations Relief, and UNRWA after the war, which were under the Marshall Plan and et cetera, that's what really built up the Europe again.
You were serving then with which other countries while you were?
No, I was with the American, say that again?
In Granville, there were other troops from other countries though?
Oh yes, we saw Russian troops, we saw, in fact, it was a recuperating area, and they had a casino there on the beach, and everything else was just super. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better life. I mean, I had it made.
And a last question, did you think World War II was the war to end all wars? Did you think there were going to be any wars?
I believed it would have ended all wars, but human nature as it is, and people as it is, it's not right. It's wrong. It's so wrong. You got to extend your hand. You have to, and my philosophy is, don't hurt me, and I certainly will not hurt you. And I started to say, you extend your hand. Life could be so beautiful if people would just understand one another. But how can it be human nature as it is? Brother doesn't like brother, sister doesn't like sister, brother doesn't like sister, and sister doesn't like brother. That's what it is. And it's the same thing with countries. It's so wrong, it's so terrible. And as you said, did I think that this would be the last war to end all wars? No, because history proves, you go back to the beginning of time, religion has a tremendous factor in it. You go back over the period of time, you had the War of the Roses, the 100-Year Wars, the Crusades, and everything else that went with it. And it always had to do with religion. Today, it's a different thing. This sphere of influence, the greatest country in the world, United States, and God bless the United States, is that we have enemies out there, and they're so jealous of us, they hate us. Why? Because we are what we are. And if people don't understand it, this is the greatest country in the world, bar none. And I've done a lot of traveling.
We can't continue because we're out of tape, so I have to thank you. It was an exciting interview, so.
Well, I hope I did what you wanted me to do.
Oh, you did beautifully. It's nice that you brought something beautiful home from the war. So.
Right. Okay.
All right.
All right.
I told you they'd take an hour.
So once you start, it's like everything starts coming out.
Well,
Just take a moment. Let me take your, I gotta.
Hold on, stay there.